Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Monday Q&A. So let's knock this out. How do you feel about DNA testing being used for fitness purposes? It seems to be getting big in the UK with places like dnafit. I was unaware this was getting big in the UK. I've got mixed feelings on this. Do I think it's the way of the future? Probably. Do I think right now it's good? No. What I've seen right now, every example that I've seen online right now, it seems to be not really something that's effective. They're doing testing and then using it to try to make recommendations to people's diet and nutrition, but it seems to me that the people making the recommendations based upon the testing don't actually themselves have a very, very strong knowledge of training programming, so their suggestions are very much falling back into bro science. Since they don't actually understand what this stuff means in the body or how to program around it, they're just throwing random guesses at it, even though they've got your genetic code and they're looking at things like muscle fiber distribution and hormones. They don't actually know what to do with it as far as the suggestions go. Just from my observations thus far, now I haven't seen the company you've listed here, never heard of them. I don't know if they fall into that category, but the ones that I've seen do, I'm not very impressed. Do I think in the long term, as we do more studies and research and we figure out how to apply these different genotypes to certain types of training and diet models, and as DNA testing becomes cheaper and cheaper as we get better at it, I think it will very much become something very useful and viable in the future. I don't think where it's at right at this moment, it doesn't appear to be, but I can see it going that way relatively soon. So it is probably the way forward. All right, next question. To what degree do you take into consideration a successful individual's experience when it contradicts less than definitive research? All right, I like this one because this is where I always tell people, and I've had people like McCarthy get mad at me for saying this in the past. Like back before I even started a channel, we got in a debate on the forum over this. I think that you do need to take the anecdote into consideration of champions. I'm not saying that should be used as a high standard of evidence, but if that is all you have to go on, you don't have definitive research that is really, that you have research is really ambiguous and not answering it correctly, and you have a lot of anecdote and a lot of people very successfully using a given protocol when compared with a different protocol, they're getting more success with it. I think that that makes the anecdote and the real life experience be really your best standard of evidence until there is more definitive data looking at the variables. And people need to remember that oftentimes even the definitive data may differ from the real world because we're missing something in the real world or because we're missing something in the data. And one of the debates I always get into with this stuff with Brad Schoenfeld, and I point out when I get in these discussions on like Alan Aragon's page with him each time, is that's fine that you did this testing in drug-free athletes, but who competes in anything drug-free? They're the exception to the rule. There's a lot of guys who claim to compete drug-free in various sports, but they are the exception to the rule. They're not the norm. So while you're studying this stuff on athletes with no drugs in the mix, it might be helpful to that rare individual, or maybe goes back to the non-competitor. Maybe it'll give them a small edge that they may or may not need. But how's it helping the guys who are on drugs? That's the real competitors. So, and because there's such a cultural issue there, people don't know how to really propose the right research, and the research might get looked at negatively when it's actually the helpful research. Or there's a lot of variables. It may not even be the drug issue. It could be a host of other issues. You may have data that doesn't match the target demographic or the way people are doing it in the real world, so you get conflicting information. And what you have to do is look at it all intelligently and try to figure out when there is a difference between the data and a difference between the real world, which one is actually right and which variables have been missed or misunderstood by the people in the real world or in the actual literature of how it may or may not apply correctly to what you're trying to do. Because a study may study one thing and it doesn't automatically guarantee that something very, very similar but not quite the same is going to give you the same answer. You really have to look at both and weigh it all out. But in the instance that you gave, I would lean heavy in the direction of the anecdote until there is more definitive data. And once you get definitive data, then you need to ease back in the direction of the data. All right, next question. Is there any point to this whole lining up the fiber shit? I keep seeing posted about incline, decline press versus flat bench. Surely nobody knows the exact angle and nature of the ribcage to know this. This is the stuff I've been making videos on recently, again, of explaining why this stuff isn't even that important in the real world. Okay, so this is exactly what we mean by bro science, and a lot of the people who are promoting this are very much science oriented, but they're guilty of bro science, and they don't seem to understand that they are. They are effectively saying that because of anatomy, and this seems to line up this way, that we think that this exercise will produce superior hypertrophy based upon these angles on an anatomy chart, without actually studying it and getting a full answer to seeing if that's really true or not in a real dynamic human model, or if it even matters. So since they don't have data to support it, and they're using a small bit of science to extrapolate and say, well, and then they're trying to claim that it is true with no data to support it, that's bro science. Now, very oftentimes bro science turns out to be correct once we study it later, and that is a point people do forget. It's not always a bad thing, but that is an example of bro science. The data doesn't show that. And we certainly have plenty of evidence observing it in the real world. There are people who do exclusively one type of bench press, whether it's decline, flat, or incline, and they have amazing chest development with that as their primary exercise, doing very little else for it. There are plenty of people out there who meet that mold. So we know at the very least it's not universally true. And people forget these differences in stimulation between these in the chest, in the different parts of the chest, may be relatively small in the grand scheme of things. It may not be enough of a difference to make a difference. So no, I don't really ascribe to this. And as much as people want to argue, no, look at the way it works, it's absolute. No, it's not. It isn't proven. That is a hypothesis based upon a physiology model, like an anatomy model. It doesn't mean that it actually works that way in the real world once we study it in a dynamic human, that it actually produces better results over time. There's a big difference between the two. And it's very clear that all of these can be very effective for producing real results over time. We've seen it time and time again. And no study has proven otherwise in a long-term model. And that's important, because that is what you're trying to do with science, is to falsify hypothesis. Well, the hypothesis of that hasn't been falsified yet. All right, next question. Hi, Jason. I'm on your novice program, bulking. My wrists hurt. I'm a professional guitar player, and it interferes a little bit with my work. I played the guitar all through high school and middle school, so I can see how that would be a problem. The squat is the lift that hurts the most. Stand-up press with the false grip you teach also hurt. I may not be setting the weight properly on the back in the squats, as I feel I'm holding some of it with my hands. Can this be the problem? Thoughts, solutions? Thanks a lot. If you're taking any of the weight in your hands on the squat, you need to adjust your bar position, and you need to adjust your hands, because you should be able to take just a false grip. You should be able to get your back ultra tight, your scapula pinched back, and the bar rest there in your 1 rep max squat position with only 1 or 2 fingers over the bar if you had to. You just barely touch it with 2 fingers for stability, to keep it from going left or right. You should not be actually gripping the bar hard enough to put strain on your wrists at all. You need to adjust your grip and your bar position if that's the case. Start back over. You're setting it incorrectly. As far as the wrist hurting as a result, it may be lack of flexibility, or you might be trying to grip the bar too far forward in the wrist instead of racking it all the way back. Like if you look in my demonstration videos, I've got the bar all the way back here like this sometimes, depending on what you're doing. And if you need to, go ahead and do that. And you should be able to adjust your wrist into a position to where it puts less strain on the wrist. A lot of people, when you start turning it out more, it strains the wrist more, but if you just turn it in enough, you may find that it helps. If you get it back on the fingertips back here, get the wrist in enough, you might find you have no wrist pain, no shoulder pain, anything. You need to play with it a little bit till you can find your sweet spot. But if your wrists are already sore from doing the squat incorrectly, it will absolutely transfer to the standing press as well, because you do that afterwards in my program. So fix the squat and then see what happens with the overhead press. All right, next question. Zahir khudayarov, I can't even pronounce his name. 450 kilogram squat thoughts. That's squat raw with wraps. Make sure you note the difference. Not raw. But my thoughts. The lift is very impressive. I know that he got stuck in the 275 kilo because he didn't make weight for the 242. He wanted to break Dan Green's record. I know that he failed to make weight, but he still hit one hell of a squat. It's an impressive squat. I think as a lifter, he is very, very strong. But as someone who is an official at meets, his past behavior for which he has been suspended before from competitions, if I was reffing a meet and saw that shit, I would not be cool with it. I would probably judge him very, very strictly just because of the fact the guy has a history of acting like a complete ass and bringing disrespect to the sport at meets. How you act at home, how you act in public and other things is your own business. But when you are at a meet, there's a certain standard of behavior, and going and harassing and screaming and yelling at other lifters and throwing the equipment around because you're angry isn't the sort of behavior I like to see in a lifter. So I don't respect his behavior at meets. I do respect his work ethic and his skill and his genetics. And I think the lift is impressive, but his track record makes me a little uneasy. It makes it hard for me to be a fan. But that's just personal bias as someone who's had to ref at meets and has had to deal with angry lifters and angry coaches already, just having reffed a small number of meets at this point. All right, next question. Do intra-workout carbs equal better performance and therefore better gains? Depends on the person, depends on your overall diet, and it depends on your actual training of what you're doing, of how much volume you're doing. I would say anyone doing really high volumes of training, some intra-workout carbs are probably a pretty good idea. Anybody doing long bouts of cardio, intra-workout carbs are probably a pretty good idea. For other people, though, who are getting plenty of calories, either getting enough pre-workout or enough the night before, who aren't necessarily doing large amounts of volume, probably not going to do much for you, if anything. So there's a lot of variables to consider there, but in the right environment, yeah, intra-workout carbs can produce better performance, better energy during your training, during the back half of your training particularly, which could equal more gains. Sure, of course. All right, next question. Perhaps veering into the philosophical realm, why aren't things like mechanical growth factor and to a lesser extent AAS, which is androgenic anabolic steroids, used alongside physiotherapy to correct imbalances and weaknesses? This stems partly from the I want it now thinking, but also what's the most efficient way of getting a person back to full capacity would be involved. I think that in the future, if we can get around the stupid politics in the media demonization and political arguments between different countries using this to make other countries, to demonize other countries and make them look bad, at least the mechanical growth factor is probably going to be used for physical therapy of muscles in the near future. I can see it as having a very strong role in that. Medically, it's perfect for it. And it doesn't seem to have long-term side effects or risks. Whereas then with the steroids, you're going to have to deal with all the media and the demonization that goes along with it, combined with the fact that they can have some very noticeable negative side effects in a lot of people. And so therefore, it's going to be harder to push the anabolics for that purpose, even though I think they'd be fantastic for it. I agree. Getting doctors on board, particularly with the politics and the demonization, could be hard. But I think with something like mechanical growth factor, which doesn't have side effects, that we very well may see doctors try to push that because it would be beautiful for physical therapy. Particularly when it's soft tissue physical therapy like muscle tissue, it would tremendously help. My own experience as an athlete, having used it on minor injuries, it is miraculous. All right, next question and last question of the week. What would you do when someone you care about seems to be addicted to bodybuilding and obsessed with winning bodybuilding competitions? All right, I'm clearly the person to ask here because I'm one of the channels that believes that bodybuilding competition is inherently unhealthy and there is no way to compete in competitive bodybuilding by today's standards, whether it's in the drug-tested or the untested. Let's not even use the word natty. We're not. Tested versus untested, I think just dieting down that lane in and of itself takes a psychological, a physiological, and a hormonal toll on you, and I think it is negative to your health, irrespective of how careful you are about it. And I'm not trying to say that my own sport, powerlifting, doesn't have some inherent dangers. In some instances, it can be just as dangerous as bodybuilding, but it isn't by default anywhere near as dangerous automatically for everyone. It has the potential to be, and therein lies the difference. For bodybuilding, it doesn't seem to be much of a way around it. It's unhealthy. Some ways are more unhealthy than others, but it's going to be unhealthy. And yeah, if someone that I loved was addicted to bodybuilding and concerned with that, I would address it to them just like I would any other health concern. If they smoked cigarettes, if they were morbidly obese, or anything, I would address it along those same lines and make sure they understand the health risk. But at the end of the day, even though you love people, you can't make them live the life that you want. And if anything, it's going to strain your relationship if you try to force them or be overly aggressive about it all the time. It will negatively impact those things, and it doesn't even work. In case in point, my sister and I tried every trick in the book to get my mother to stop smoking. My mother smoked 2 packs a day. The only time she came off cigarettes is when she was pregnant with us. She smoked 2 packs a day, and then later in life she ate bad. She didn't exercise at all. She trained for a little bit in her 20s and then quit. And she died at 48 of a heart attack. She was slightly overweight, ate terrible, did no exercise of any type, had smoked 2 packs a day since her teens. So 30 years of smoking 2 packs a day combined with that, it killed her. And we tried everything you could imagine to try to convince her to quit smoking. Every psychological tactic, mean trick, growing up, anything that we did all sorts of stuff over the years to try to get her to stop. Nothing worked because she didn't want to. And it's the same with the people in the bodybuilding situation. Yes, bodybuilding is at the competitive level very unhealthy. It takes something that has the potential to be healthy, which is diet, exercise, taking care of yourself, and pushing it in an extreme, in a direction that is very, very unhealthy. But a lot of the people who do it are in denial of that. They're in complete denial about it, even though they suffer the ill effects of the contest diet and realize what it does to all their hormones in their body and their mood and how it negatively affects their relationships. They may see that, but they're in denial as to the health effects. And even if they aren't in denial, it's still their choice. It's their body. You have to let them do what they want to do. Just make sure that you know that they're educated about that. And you have to let them make their own choices. But if they ever want to talk about it or complain about it, be there for them. And then when they start complaining about how bad they feel, or they get really sick for months and can't get an erection for 2 months after they compete, and all the other issues that are associated with it, when they complain about those things, that's when you should work it in and say, well, considering all of that, why do you keep competing? Is it really worth that? Do you get that much out of it? And you can try to spin it from that angle. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go. Oh, Mount Vesuvius.